Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold those in power to account. We tell you what matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. COSATU affiliates in several sectors have raised alarm at the lack of compliance with Lockdown 4 rules since the reopening of the economy in a phased way by President Cyril Ramaphosa was announced a few weeks ago. This after increasing number of workers have tested positive despite government's insistence on strict adherence to the directions introduced by the Department of Employment and Labour. Joining me now is a Labour Market Policy Coordinator for the Labour Federation, COSATU, Lebohang Mulaizi. Lebohang, good morning. Thank you so much for you to come onto the show. I'm sitting here with a statement dated the 8th of May from Teachers Union SATU, and essentially they're saying that the South African Democratic Teachers Union will not allow any of her members to report for duty on Monday because the Department of Basic Education has failed to meet the minimum requirements to ensure the safety of people as per the COVID-19 alert level 4. Now, this is teachers. I've seen subsequent unions in the public sector and the retail sector echo the same sentiments. What is the experience of the Federation in terms of compliance?
Morning, Karima, and thank you for having me on the show. And the statement by SATU really hits the nail on the head with regards challenges we've been facing with regards to adherence to the Occupational Health and Safety Direction. Clearly 6 weeks into a lockdown and we're still struggling to ensure sufficient PPE for frontline workers.
Yeah.
That just shows you the extent of the challenge that we're facing, that there's just no adherence to the regulations. We decided that we needed stricter directions, focusing specifically on COVID-19 in an effort to assist employers to understand what they need to have in place. And yet today we still don't have the requisite measures to ensure that health and safety of the workers is prioritized.
Now, we're looking at the public sector here for good reason, because obviously a lot of essential workers are in fact, caught up in this. We're talking about health workers in particular. We're talking about teachers. We're talking about police, a whole lot of people that actually keep vital sectors in the economy, working. What have the Department of Health in particular said about getting PPE for health workers and health providers? Because I can't imagine that workers would be, comfortable with selling their labor, and in an attempt to do that, essentially, sell their lives in a way.
And I think that's the crux of the matter, Karima. It seems like workers are being made to choose between working as well as keeping themselves safe and alive, really, because there are fatal consequences to COVID-19. The Department of Health, we've engaged with them on a number of occasions, wanting to understand what are the issues with providing the necessary PPEs for workers. And I think what always comes to the fray is that there's just not enough PPEs to go around. And I think that's why we've engaged in a process where PPEs need to be prioritized for the frontline workers. It's completely unacceptable that those that are frontline workers have to endanger their lives every time they report for work, and that there is just not enough PPEs to go around. That is why COSATU has even gone as far as to say that we need to invoke the right to refuse dangerous work. This is a right that's enshrined and explicit in the Mining Health and Safety Act, but what we see in the current Occupational Health and Safety Act, it's not as explicit as what we want it to be. That's why this week we pushed that actually we need to push for the right to refuse dangerous work. We need to make sure that if a health worker reports for work or any other person, whether it is a teacher or a policeman or woman, if they report for work and they find that the necessary PPEs are not in place, they must invoke their right to refuse dangerous work.
Now, one of the problems, of course, with the directions is that it's just that. It's directions rather than regulations. What is the legal status or the legal rights of workers when employers refuse or do not comply with the particular directives that have been put in place to deal with the phased reopening of the economy in level 4? Because presumably we need to master level 4 in order to move to level 3.
And I guess that's the difficulties. Directions are just that, directions. They're to give you a minimum guideline, a minimum standard as what you need to do with regards to occupational health and safety. But another thing with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there's nothing specifically for COVID-19 because it gives us just unique challenges. But what is so nice about direction is that we've tried our best to link it with Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Yes.
So if you are in contravention of the direction, you can be liable for the consequences as per the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So that's one of the things that we've tried to do to give the direction teeth as compared to other directions. But what we see is that there's also a lack of compliance. So really what we're trying to do here is to make sure that when a health and safety inspector goes to a workplace and finds that there's no compliance really.
Yes.
The health and safety inspector is empowered to close down that particular workplace.
Now, when we're talking about closures, can COSATU give us an idea of who are the truly bad performers? I mean, we've singled out the Department of Health because it deals with frontline health workers. But one of the other major areas is retail, of course. We know that the shops are being kept stocked, the shelves are being kept full by workers who essentially put their own lives on the line. But we've seen many supermarkets of all the major retailers, in some instances, having been forced to close down. What is effectively the compliance rate there?
You're quite right. So after frontline workers, the workers that are at a significant danger of contracting the virus is those that ply their trade in the retail sector. The media speculation and the media reports have been quite accurate with just how many retailers have really flouted most of the regulations. Hence, you see a spike in the infection of persons who work in the retail sector. So we've received a lot of reports and a number of challenges in that space. There's no social distancing that is observed. There's a lack of screening that takes place. In fact, we were saying that those who enter the retail sector should be screened, so customers should be screened. And I'm not too sure that that's done quite earnestly in the retail sector, and that's the challenges that we faced. We've even said that if there can't be sufficient social distancing, hygiene practices, then we need to make sure that even in the retail space there's relevant PPE. And what we've seen, I mean, the reports that we've gotten from the retail sector are a bit shocking, where someone is allowed to come to work even though you know that that person is infected with COVID-19. So those are the challenges that we've faced over and above challenges in the health sector. The retail space is really starting to show us a lot of problems.
And of course, the conditions of employment in the retail sector is affected by things like casualization. You literally have people who've worked for years and years who are still casual workers, so they don't actually have any protections that the general labor market offers. And the other thing is also, people are literally having to choose between their ability to earn a living and their lives. Many people are told if they are sick, they can stay at home, but you will have a no work, no pay rule applying. What are your members reporting to you basically in terms of casualization, but also the withholding of wages in the event that people are worried about coming to work ill?
Yeah, so that's the tricky part, is that, we've developed all these wonderful legislation. So you've got the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, a wonderful labor relations act that really does wonders to protect workers that are in formal workplace arrangement and workplace contracts. But now when you have a situation with this casualization, there's a lot of part-time workers, seasonal workers, then those kind of fall through the cracks. But the Basic Conditions of Employment Act does try to cover for issues pertaining to casual work. What we did do in the direction, noting this problem of casualization, is to enforce that if a person is ill, especially with regards to COVID-19, that person must get paid sick leave. Paid sick leave is made mention to explicitly in the Occupational Health and Safety Direction, because we did foresee this challenge of when casual workers are sick, they would be subjected to principles and harsh principles at that of no work, no pay.
Now, casual work is obviously different from freelance work. A lot of freelancers, essentially, if they don't show up, they don't get paid. And we have many of those, given the growth of the gig economy and, of course, also the informalization of our economy. If someone is a freelance worker and they are ill or they are in a high-risk group, what does the Occupational Health and Safety directions and directives that have been put together, what protections does it give freelance workers?
Yes, so on top of the casual workers is the bigger challenge of freelance workers. I think what we've seen, especially in the past 6 weeks of a lockdown, is that our labor legislation is not adequate, especially when it comes to issues of freelance workers, because we've had a focus on your more traditional workplace agreements and workplace contracts. And those really are pertaining to your contracted employees who are more of a permanent or a temporary basis employee. So the labor legislation really is very silent on what do you do for freelancers. That's why we've even gone as far as saying that UIF must cover freelancers. It must cover much as possible contract workers. It must cover seasonal as well as your casual workers, because those are the workers that have fallen through the cracks. So we have these wonderful provisions for a number of people, social security nets. And what has happened is that the freelancers have fallen straight through those cracks. They have no access to any of the UIF relief that's come our way. So what we've tried to do with the Occupational Health and Safety Directive is to just talk about all workers.
Yes.
So if you ply your trade, you are a worker and you are covered. But it takes us to a more long-term discussion as to how do we make sure that freelancers contribute to the UIF, so that if something like this must ever occur again, they can receive contribution from the UIF.
Yeah. Now, of course, this is an important issue in terms of policy, because the reality is that we're never going to go back to the world that was pre-COVID-19, and that goes for the labour market as well. Is COSATU planning to table legislation in terms of UIF and other protections that protect people in the informal sector and in the freelance and gig economy?
So that's the thing about COVID-19. It's completely flipped everything on its head. So nothing is going to go back to what it used to be. People are talking about this post-COVID type of legislative era as the new normal. So ourselves as COSATU, we've identified what the gaps are when it comes to especially our Labour Relations Act that needs to be covered, and we'll definitely be tabling what we feel needs to strengthen labour relations to accommodate the new normal that takes into consideration your informal workers as well as your freelance, gig economy workers, and so on and so forth. One of the things that we have identified is that, in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, we talk about severance pay. We just think the way severance pay is calculated is inadequate, especially in the context of COVID-19. So those are the gaps that we've identified, especially as well as the number of people that need to be part of workers that are covered by severance pay, as well as benefiting from the unemployment insurance fund.
Okay, Lebogang, final question before I let you go. The Sunday Times is leading with a story this morning saying we want to avoid COVID-19 panic, and that the presidency confirms information is kept from the public for fear of stigma and causing alarm and panic. And the person quoted in the story is presidential spokesperson Kusela Diko, whom we are trying to reach out to here on The Fix. We are not able to. But just quickly, from a COSATU perspective, this headline, does it alarm you if the presidency acknowledges that it's actually keeping information from people and that they don't want to cause panic? The first thing I asked myself is, what is the information containing that will make people panic? As a Labour Federation, does this worry you? Are you going to seek an engagement with the presidency?
So the presidency is going to have to come and speak for themselves on this one. But from the point of view of, democracy and how it works and how we've always done our things, we've always thrived on doing things in a transparent way. So we'll probably urge the presidency to be as transparent as possible with the people. I think as this far, we've been very understanding with the measures that government has taken to curb the spread of the virus. So we'd appeal for transparency moving forward because we're all in this for the long haul. And I think we've done a very good job as key stakeholders to bring in what we need to in our fight against this dreaded disease. So maybe we'll just appeal to the presidency to avail themselves to respond on this. But obviously, we'd encourage greater transparency.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. That is COSATU's Occupational and Health Safety Policy Coordinator, Lebogang Mulaizi, speaking to us. Up next, while we can't return to the old economic framework and the crisis before the crisis, as the SACP says, where exactly are we heading? We unpack this with the party's Jeremy Cronin.